After a long trip through the desert, you stumble upon a mostly intact city. One that claims to be the biggest little city in the world. It's covered in bright lights. There are people everywhere, and there's even a casino. Hello and welcome to Anatomy of Fiction. Today we will be discussing the New Reno crime families. To start, we should introduce a little of the story of New Reno. New Reno originates from the city of current-day Reno. When the bombs fell on the 23rd of October 2077, the city of Reno was unaffected. It was not hit by a warhead. In fact, it was nowhere near any of the warheads that hit. This is why many of the buildings, like the casinos and bars, are still standing. However, the area was not immune to the looting and the rioting that occurred after the bombs dropped. Up into the 23rd century, the city of Reno continued to grow, becoming the most populated area in Northern California. However, with this massive population came few resources. So for many to survive what would become the post-apocalyptic Sin City of Fallout 2, many of the citizens would become made men, or people working for one of the 4 mob families running the city. But who are these crime families in New Reno? The crime families in New Reno are the Bishops, the Mordinos, the Salvatores, and the Wright families. These 4 families essentially run New Reno, with no official government to call the shots, nor is there a police force to keep the streets safe. This work is mainly left to the families, who send any troublemakers back to their maker, if you get what I mean. New Reno is not an isolated city, with these families having various trades between supplies in the den, and slaves and chemicals coming from Vault City, which these families use to make their alcohol and chems, which are then sold on to supply the other cities' needs. And they also have a less nefarious business of being one of the major players in the Brahmin trade. But each family is unique. So to get a better understanding of how each family affects New Reno, we are going to have to break down each family separately. We are going to begin with the Wright family. The Wright family is the weakest out of all of the crime families in New Reno. This is led by Orville Wright. This specific family is the only crime family that actually keeps it in the family. All of the other crime families hire outside help and mercenaries to do a lot of the dirty work. The Wright family were the biggest producers and sellers of alcohol in New Reno and are also a major group of gun runners. However, this is pretty much where their major crime involvement stops. This is due to Orville's wife, Ethel. Now, Ethel is one of the founding and also one of the only members of the Temperance Union. The Temperance Union stands for Abolishing All Alcohol in New Reno. As Ethel claims, New Reno is a beautiful city, but there is sin here, much of which can be traced back to the evils of alcohol, or as you tribesmen call it, firewater. This is a little ironic for 2 reasons. One, being that her family is the largest supplier of alcohol in New Reno, as her husband still distills it, even with her asking him to stop. And 2, the only other member of the Temperance Union is Father Tully. But what makes Father Tully ironic in his stance against alcohol? Well, he is a drunkard. Yes, he, as the other founding member of the Temperance Union, which is against alcohol in New Reno, spends his time drinking. The Temperance Union is not the only faction in New Reno that the Wright family have interactions with. This is evident with the death of their youngest son, Richard. This was from what they suspected to be a jet overdose. Now, if it was actually an overdose, that would just be due to a heavily addictive chem produced by another crime family, specifically the Mordinos. This happened often on the streets of New Reno and across the rest of the Fallout wasteland. But something about this smells fishy, or should I say scorpiony, rad. Scorpiony. That's right, the Salvatores had a hand, or a stinger, I should say, in the death of Richard Wright. They had Renesco, the Rocket Man, tamper with some jet, adding some of the rad scorpion venom as a way to knock off their competition. They hoped that this would pit the Wrights against the Mordinos. However, with the Chosen One, which is the character you play as, pulling a Hercule Poirot and using their grey cells, it's easily pointed back to the Salvatores. Let's now move on to the Salvatore family. They run their operation primarily out of the Salvatore's bar over on the west side of New Reno. They are one of the more quiet and low profile of the New Reno crime families. Make no mistake, this does not mean they are weak, cowardly, or unwilling to get into a fight. No. The Salvatore family are perhaps one of the more brutal families out of the groups, with their patriarch Louis Salvatore being especially willing to punish others for insulting him and the family for anything, even something as little as cheating at cards. The Salvatore family do often deal in chems, using Renesco's pharmacy as a site of manufacture and distribution. This is a site they claim to be under their protection, so they often gain the majority of the profit from Renesco's work. The Salvatore family have some other interesting business experience. If you remember the Enclave having a special variant of the FEV virus, known as the Curling 13 variant, then you may wonder how they got the chemical components to construct this version and to run the experiments. Well, the Salvatores traded the necessary chemical components for the Enclave's experiments with the virus for laser weapons. These laser weapons are part of the reason why the other crime families leave the Salvatores alone, as they were used in the West Side Massacre. The West Side Massacre occurred in early 2241, as the Mordinos and the Bishop family had been encroaching on the Salvatore's territory and attempting to control that part of New Reno. In retaliation, 2 of Salvatore's men would kill groups of bishops and Mordinos' men, as a little warning to stay out of their part of New Reno, which for the most part worked. The Salvatores, although quiet, do attempt to create rivalries between the other gangs by using tampered with jet, which is a chem made by the Mordino family to poison the child of the Wright family. By doing this and succeeding, they would have been able to take over the chem supply of New Reno, as they would have caused the Wrights and Mordinos to wipe each other out. However, the Wrights weren't exactly falling for it. Now we should discuss the Mordino family and their dealings. The Mordino family have an interesting history before they became the 4th crime family. The father and son duo, Senor Jesus Mordino and Little Jesus, were originally slaves before the year 2241. However, they managed to free themselves. Initially, they were selling the New Reno experience to tourists as peyote cactus farmers. But this is not what they still sell as a crime family. No. However, it is where they would meet their buddy, the boy genius Myron. Yes, I am talking about the strange teenager that is kept in the basement of the stables, making various chemicals that you can also have as a companion. With the Mordinos growing as a crime family in New Reno, they would help New Reno in its struggle to find power in the political struggle over Northern California. A lot of the struggle is based around the town of Redding, as this is the supplier of gold ore. And with the currency change, this ore was needed to make the dollars. Yes, in Fallout 2, dollars are used instead of caps. The Mordinos would attempt to assert their influence by supplying chems to the miners in Redding. This is where Myron becomes important. So Myron would evaluate the stash that the Mordinos had, and instead of using their original chems, he invented jet. This was the perfect chem for the Mordino family plan. It was highly addictive and caused severe withdrawal symptoms. The first batch of jet was sent to Redding in 2241 in January. This meant that Redding was more closely controlled by New Reno. Not long after this, jet would hit the streets of New Reno, causing mass addiction, and of course the Mordinos family rise to power as one of the 4 crime families of New Reno. You may have found their jet research and testing facility, the Stables, which mostly houses slaves. Yes, the Mordinos, who were former slaves, keep slaves as test subjects for jet. They are actually the largest buyers of slaves in New Reno. They are not just used as test subjects at the stables. No, the Mordinos are not a one-trick pony kind of family. You will also see these slaves at their special movie studio, the Golden Globes, making movies for mature audiences and offering special services at the Mordinos Casino, which is the Desperado. Because of the growing power and influence with their multiple businesses, especially their jet trade, the Mordino family would grow brave, a little too brave, and try to trade on the turf of the Salvatores. This obviously did not end well, as there was obviously the West Side Massacre that occurred in early 2241, which we covered. The Mordino family would lose their footing as a prominent crime family in New Reno after the Chosen One, which again is the protagonist you play as in Fallout 2, initiated the discovery of the cure for jet addiction. With this antidote, jet was no longer the addictive chem that was causing issues throughout Northern California. Due to this, over the next few decades, the Mordino family would lose their hold on the city of New Reno and fade into obscurity from whence they came. Don't worry, the Mordinos aren't the last crime family, nor are they the only crime family of New Reno to own a casino. For that, we are going to have to move to the Bishop family. The Bishop family own the Shark Club Casino. This is run by John Bishop with the very occasional help from his wife, Leslie Bishop, or Leslie Ann Bishop. the main interesting character in this fam is actually Leslie. Now, she did not originally come from New Reno. No, she actually originates from Vault City. This is where she met John Bishop. Leslie was highly educated with career prospects. However, John was a bit of the opposite. He was a bad boy type. He was much more interesting than the majority of other characters in Vault City. And part of this bad boy facade was his ability to provide chems, more specifically, Jet. Yes, Mr. Bishop got Leslie hooked on Jet, which led to her being stripped of her citizenship in Vault City, having no one to turn to but John, which of course he planned. Leslie married him, and they obviously had their not-so-angelic daughter, Angela. But hold up a minute. Angela is 15 to 20 years old. So Leslie and John's marriage isn't exactly new. But Leslie getting hooked on Jet, which led to their marriage in the first place, the chem is only supposed to be a year or two old right now. So Angela should realistically only be a baby. However, as mentioned in one of the Fallout Bibles, this is a little mess up in the timeline. But anyway, enough about the timeline not aligning, moving on. The Bishop's primary work is in gambling, which is obvious in their ownership of a casino, and also certain adult services out of the casino. I'm sure you can get what I'm coming from. The Bishops wanted to end the mob-based anarchy that New Reno runs on. They were also attempting to work with both Vault City and the New Californian Republic to legalize gambling and certain adult activities. If you want to know more about the NCR, let me know in the comments. So the Bishop family had many dealings in the politics and the relations between NCR and the Vault City. Prior to 2241, the NCR actually hired the Bishop family to convince Vault City that they needed the NCR's help and protection. The Bishops hired a group of raiders to harass Vault City in an attempt to convince them to turn to ask the NCR for protection. So out of all the crime families, the Bishops are a lot more politically minded, trying to get their business legalized and expand into alliances with other cities. Essentially, this family is trying to go from crime to actually politics. Now that we know what each family does as part of their business activities, let me know in the comments which family would you work for. If you enjoyed this video, then you should check out this one. It is about the story of the Enclave in Fallout 2 and whether or not their plan is right.